Hello, Halftone Dan here. I wanted to go over the I-image curve adjustments and some important areas that you want to look at when you're making adjustments. So I got my file open here in Illustrator. It's a test file. That's the spot color. I can make that any color, but I'll change it to black so you can see it better. It's got a little bit of hue in it, a little bit of blue hue. Strip that out. In this file, I have this gradation bar going from 100% solid to 0%. That's an important piece here that you want to include in your test, as well as these little isolated areas of percentages. You'll see that each one of these is filled with a percent. Excuse me. Can't see my Illustrator back. There it is. You'll see that each one of these is filled with a percentage. If you click on it, that'll be filled 5%, as you see right there, and so on, 100%. Key areas when you're making screens for halftone printing, for simulated process or four-color process printing, is in your screens you want to be able to hold down to the 3, 4, or 5% dots. Those ranges down there is what's critical. That's where in halftone printing, especially fades to the shirt and whatnot, you'll get these abrupt drop-offs, and you want to make sure you're holding these dots. That'll provide you this soft fade like you see down here in this bar. Every digital printer, every film printer or imaging device is going to have some dot gain. The machine itself will have some dot gain. And that's why they have a rip that it will make adjustments geared toward what you need to come out of it. And also what you need based off of information that you've obtained from printing on press with the test. If you happen to be one of the shops that is able to use a densitometer and read your printed percentages and then get more accurate adjustments in your rip. So the reason why I point out the gradation bar is because in your curves, it's kind of like Photoshop when you have adjustments in your curves. This is all mapped off, going all the way across when you look in the I-image rip. I'll go there real quickly, and you can see like this is our default curve. I use a slightly different one, but the rest of our shop has been accustomed to using this, which I don't find is as accurate, but that's why they're accustomed to. And mind you, when you get accustomed to a certain curve, you start reacting in your separations. So you may plan for in advance, again, which is dot gain compensation, what's going to happen on press. So you may cut back or add in certain areas where you think you might be losing. So the whole benefit of a rip, and an accurate rip, is that you want it to do the work for you so that you could just separate and not have to make any adjustments or compensations for dot gain. Once it's all done, you don't have to think about it. You just do your separations, print it out, and it does it for you. That's what this rip is for. That's what this halftone curve is for, to let the machine print out the compensations. So I wanted to show you that gradation bar, if you have a slight little bump here like this, well, that's going to show up in your print. Like when I go to the gradients, and I'll add another spot here. See if I could do that. I'm trying to represent that. I don't know if you can see it. There, you can see it easily. That is what I would call a bump. It's not as smooth and transitioning from a nice fade from nothing to solid. You'll get this fill in right here. Again, as you know, you're going to get some fill in on press. So if this is 70%, it's actually going to be 75, 85, 90% in print. And that's why in the curves you don't want to have these little bumps like this. And so I'll cancel out of that, and I'll show you now how to adjust and save these curves. So click on the folder that you're currently using and right click, go to Setup Properties, straight to Adjust, and then you can make your changes. So this is the 1%, this is the 100% up in the corner, and there's going to be your 50% zone right there at that point. When you first get your I-IMAGE machine, M&R puts one in. So first off, the rip comes with no adjustment at all. It looks like that. And you don't want to see that at all. That's going to give you a lot of major fill in. Like at the 50% area, it's going to be 70%, 80%. At the 60%, it's going to fill in solid. And that's just junk. So because this is a 600 DPI printer, and all 600 DPI printers are doing the same type of quality, so I don't want you to get this wrong. I want to enlarge this a little bit. 600 DPI printers don't produce the smallest amounts accurately or tightly. They're made up of little squares. So, think of it like this. No gradation. Think of it like this. That might be a 1% dot, and this might be a 3% dot, and this might be a 4% dot. Actually, it wouldn't be in the middle like that. It'd be over there like this, because it works off of a grid, pretty much like what you see here. So this is how it forms the dots. And the more you, the more dots, the more percentages you have. Let's say a 10% dot or a 20% dot. It's not going to come out like this. When you look at it up on the edge, in vector, it looks crisp and clean. When you look at it in Photoshop, it's working off of these small, minute bitmaps or pixels that are even much smaller than that. But so the edges are going to be stair-stepped. You may see it. Well, everybody that has an I-IMAGE has seen this, I'm sure now. But so that's got to have a dot made from it. Then it does this one and so on to form that dot. All imaging devices do this. They have to work off of a grid, convert it to black and white. So they have to put a dot there to represent a 1%, a 2%, and so on. 600 DPI is not going to be that great. You get 12 and it's going to be 50% of that size, right? Excuse me, allergies are bad this time of year. It's tighter, so you get a better formed dot at the between the 1 and 10% range at 1200 DPI. But most digital printers are 600 DPI printers. Better film printers, better imaging devices are 1200 or higher. And so back in the day, we used to have 3500 DPI printers, and so those were film imaging devices, and those were the best, but also most expensive to upkeep, and their general maintenance on them was a lot as well, and so they were very costly. Those machines used to be anywhere from 15,000 to 60,000, and higher, depending on the company you get them from, and the resolution and quality and whatnot that you want to get out of it. Much like rips, you can get a $600 rip, or you can get a $15,000 rip, and for screen printing, you don't need that much. But so, to give you an idea, 600 DPI printers, most people for the last 10, 15 years have been doing award-winning prints using wax machines, wet ink machines, and film. 1200, 600 DPI film printers. So there's nothing wrong with that level. Sure, the laser printers have higher resolution dots and printers, but you're only going to see that real benefit from the 0% to the 10% and everything in between. Those dots are going to be far more well formed in shape. But again, back to my point, and I'm getting off track here, but back to my point is the shape of the dot doesn't really matter. The question is, does it represent the tone that you need? So it could be a squiggle, a circle, an oval, a square. So the shape of your dot doesn't really matter. That's why wax dots, people like the wax dots because they print fatter, heavier, down in the shadow tones like the 1%, because this 1% is far less controlled off of a wax machine, and it really just kind of prints a couple blobs down in that spot. So your 1% may look, something like that, and it will have dimension. So if I could draw it freely, your dot may end up kind of looking like that on the screen. That shape, crackers. Let me fill this in. So it'll have height, whereas a wet ink machine, of course, is not. It's going to, be looking more like that. But this is obviously going to have more density, more opacity because of the thickness of the wax. And yeah, the dot is not shaped well. It looks more like a clump, but that doesn't really matter either because, like I said, as long as it's representing the tone that you want down there properly, and people don't really care if it's really a 3% or is it a 6%. You get some technical people like that want to reproduce fine art, like Michel Kaza, Marc Coudray, Andy Anderson, they want to reproduce it exactly as it's intended. For me, I don't really care if that's a 3% or if it's a 6%. As long as it's a dot that's holding for me and I see some data information down there, I can control that on press. Enough. It's not going to be perfect, but this is t-shirts, and I guess I'll let the rest of the world win the awards if they want to really compete and compare with whether or not you're getting a 3% to a 3%, apples to apples. Back to my point. So, the wax inks, 1%, 3% is not necessarily better. It's just different. It's easier to hold, although it's less accurate than the wet ink. The wet ink is going to print a spit of ink representing that 1% dot more accurately than this will, the 1% wax ink. But again, it doesn't really matter. It's not that important. That area down there, that's why people love, they'll say, oh, I love the way the wax ink holds the dots better. Yeah, it's holding it better because it's fatter. It's going to be easier to hold. But it's not a true representation of that percentage. So with the wet ink, I have to bump it or force it a little bit to be hold better, because as I was saying, these smaller dots, these smaller squares, they don't reproduce as well. In fact, it's almost to the point where you may not even hold with your emulsion alone the 1% dot in a 65 line screen. Yeah, you can hold it maybe in the emulsion, but the stencil thread thickness is going to block that itself. So again, that's why people like the wax inks, because it comes out better, because it holds better. They don't lose anything because that 3% is really a 6 or an 8%. Now, for me, I want to intentionally do that. I want to bump this up to make it look more like this so that I can hold it better and form smaller dots better. And that's kind of what we're doing in the dot gain compensation. So getting back to that, you do that in the RIP curves. And so that's an example of no curve at all. And then this is an example, let's say, I forget, it was like, was this the 80? Must have been the opposite way. Nope. I forget what it was. 80-60. I was calling it 80-20 because I'm thinking of that sales rule, but it's the 80-60, and that's M&R's default that they install the machines with. And then if you're savvy enough and you ask them in time during the install about better curves for your I-IMAGE, they may load you some. So here we have saved curves that we've tested out in different years, and this is my most recent one. Takes a second for it to load. So this, as you see, I'm beefing up my small dots, my 2 and 4%, beefing those up a little bit. And then I'm starting to curve it back down because through testing we found right about at the 20% mark to the 50% mark, you get this slope that starts to creep back up slowly, but it's opened up very deeply in the 50% zone, cutting back for dot gain. And then really opened up at the shadow tones. But so the end result is it's kind of like an reverse S curve. And my earbuds fell out. And this will be one that I'll use, and this helps me get better compensation in the small dots and opens up my midtones so that, you can, if there's excess dot gain, which a lot of production shops like to do, they, I won't get into that, but there's many reasons of shops having excess gain. But so I'm pre-compensating for that. So it's much easier to add more if it's printing too light on press than it is to remove it. So if you're already getting way too much dot gain fill in, you can't take away as easily as you can by adding excess dot gain. You can do a double stroke, you can angle the squeegee out, you can slow the stroke down, you can change it out to another type of squeegee rubber to lay down more ink without having to go back and change artwork. So this is allowing a compensation and printing it light, having it output light is a way of allowing control on press rather than controlling in the seps. I mean, you're already doing a little control in the seps, so I can't really say that. But then once you have the curve that you made and you made some tweaks, and remember, make sure that when you do your test in print production, like you want to rip one with the regular M&R curve or the current curve that you're using, and then rip another one, rename the test file new curve, and then rip that again using the new curve that you're going to make here. And then in print production, you can toggle back and forth between the two single files, and you can quickly see the changes. So I didn't go back far enough to undo with that to show you, but getting back to the rip curves. In print production, you can toggle back and forth to see those. I can't show you that here because in the art department we only have color print in here, and it's in the art department and not out on the I-IMAGE machine. And so I don't get to log into the I-IMAGE rip machine. But this is just showing you the curves. And so then once you made your changes, you want to click on Save as a new curve and give it a name and a date and call it new. But then if you revise a lot, you don't want to keep calling it new. So obviously change it to numbers like number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on. A, B, C, so such as that. And then once you save it, that gives you the option to go back and use another curve. So here's another kicker. When you make changes in the curves, that applies to every time you rip a new job. All the older jobs that have been ripped, if you don't archive and pull up the old files from the archive, no matter what your rip is set to, the old archived files are going to be ripped the same with the PRT files. So those are great for reorders. Archiving is great for reorders, so that they pull up the same way they printed the last time. If you come in here and you re-rip the job again using the new curve, it's obviously going to output and look different, and sometimes, and most times actually, it's going to look drastically different if you've got an 8 or a 10 color simulated process, now you've got halftones bouncing all over the place differently from when it was done the first time. So avoid that. To avoid that, you can actually duplicate this folder. And so you go to set up properties again, click on the little flyout window on the right here and click on save setup. And that'll give you a new one. You just call it new tester. Click OK. And then, so that did not change anything with this folder. It just duplicated it and created you a new folder. So the reason why you want to duplicate it is so that when you double click on it, all your other stuff is set up the same way as your previous folder. So you're not changing anything except the adjust folder. That's very important, so pay attention to that. And then in this new test folder, you can load your new curve that you just made, and as soon as that loads up, you click apply and OK, and now you're done. You're ready to use this to apply your new test. So you would just add job, load in a new test file, click OK, and there it's ready to rip. And that's that pretty much. Don't have much else to say about that, but if you have any questions, send me an email. Thank you much. Bye.